What is cultural Marxism and where did it come from?
Cultural Marxism emerged out of the Ascona Lodge in Switzerland, which is an occult hub where people like Max Weber, Freud, Jung, many others were conglomerating before World War I.
So it didn't come from Marx.
No, it was basically a syncretization of certain aspects of what Marx said, utilizing his forever proletariat revolution formula for universal history and dialectic materialism. And they spliced in some Freudian analysis, and they spliced in some Weberian sociodynamics, and they made like a new synthesis. And it emerged with George Lukács first in Hungary in 1919, who was the cultural minister, trying to teach like sex ed and stuff to kids and overthrow Christianity. And then when that didn't last long. And then they moved to Frankfurt, Germany, had their School of Social Research centered there. And Herbert Marcuse was involved, and Walter Benjamin and Theodor Adorno, and a lot of Leo Strauss's networks were involved with this grouping. And when fascism was emerging in the 30s, it was getting a little bit hot for some of these intellectuals. So they were all given access. They had already been trickling into the United States in the 20s, but they were given like a major access in Chicago and New York to the New School, and by the head of the American branch of the Fabian Society named John Dewey. John Dewey was the guy overseeing, with Walter Lippmann, the American branch of that Fabian Society operation, which was basically eugenics, and creating new schools. And like I said, mostly Chicago at the time and New York big time, provided the sanctuary, the base of operations where they were allowed free reign. And California was another big entry point to basically to apply a perverse reading of Marx, like I said, fused with certain Freudian assumptions and Weber, into remaking humankind around a new type of human that would be detached from any type of traditional value, moral sensibility that was keeping us from our true selves, that were imposed by cultural standards that were abstract and should be thus destroyed. The major points of attack were the idea of an optimism around humanity, the idea of a faith in God, a rational, loving creator, an idea of nation state or family that you could trust. These were like obstructive influences for the type of brave new world, new human that they wanted to make. A lot of them gave rise to the education reforms brought into play after World War II, overseen by people like Alexander King, who is also bringing online cybernetics into the management of administrative practices of the OECD, of NATO, of the U.S. government. Rand Corps was also interfacing with a lot of these. A lot of them were former Trotskyists, like Albert Volstetter and James Brown.
Trotskyists. Oh my God,
they're everywhere.
Trotsky, right?
No, they're everywhere, man.
They just cause problems left and right. They really put a stain on everything. How do you think cultural Marxism is being used today? Right?
Yeah, it's to inflame hostilities between perceived minority groups and build. So basically, they want to create a civil war in America that failed back in the 1860s. They want to try to do it again, but utilizing some of these mind techniques.
Yeah,
Tavistockian controls, MK Ultra controls have been deploying it, and they want to try to create every. They want to basically make everybody define themselves around their some ephemeral characteristic or secondary, tertiary characteristic, like their sexuality, their gender,
ungodly
their
of sorts.
Huh?
Yeah. Ungodly, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, and just see themselves as perpetual victims who then have like a revenge impulse that can be cultivated, incubated against their perceived systemic oppressor. In this case, white European males are the perceived oppressor that you should feel hate to, independent of any type of progress you've made towards emancipating your race or your gender. None of that matters anymore. You're still going to relive, kind of like a lot of the Zionists are taught to relive the pain, the suffering of the Holocaust, relive it, and then act out. You shouldn't be surprised when they start acting out in a crazy ass way when they're triggered politically to do so. And similar things with Black Lives Matter and all of the other subgroups. Yeah.
So what I'm gathering there's these works that are a theory that were written, and I'm not well versed in this stuff, and somehow those things have been tied to communism, and even though they didn't really come from communism, And we see some of this stuff being implemented today under the guise of things like DEI programs like diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think there's an association that's made from these things that were somehow tied to communism, which I want to do more studying on this because I really want to understand it. And that there's a link to that to what we're seeing now with the modern stuff, like with the DEI stuff. And so you've got like more conservative groups are seeing that and seeing what these DEI groups are pushing, and they don't like it. And I think that's why they're calling it communist. But this is something, these are initiatives that are being pushed by the liberals and neoliberals in our society today. And the people who are very, very interested in having censorship on our society, which is like not a communist or socialist principle. Like if you're on the left, you're supposed to be against a censorship. And so I think for me, what I need to do is learn more about these sources that are talked about. You just mentioned them all. I'm going to listen to this again so I can try to absorb it better. But I'm starting to get the feeling that that's where the link is coming from. And so how do we dispel? It seems like this is a myth that that these ideas are communist, and that is like it's a falsehood that's been brought forward. And that's why you've got these conservative groups and conservative peoples are look at what's going on today, and they're blaming it on communists that are trying to run our society, when it's actually people who are actually very opposed to communism who are doing the things like trying to create a sexless society and impose like these new gender norms and stuff like that, which, you know, it's a scale on what people feel about them. Yeah. But it's I think there's also a generational gap too, with how much people want to accept them. So I don't know. I'm trying to wrap my head on it, and I think I'm getting close to it, but I'm struggling to articulate it, and I want to be able to graph it out and be able to explain it to somebody like on the back of a napkin. Yeah, so, like, I don't know over dinner. And I mean, and I don't know if it's possible, but I think if we could reach that, then it would be something. It would be a way that we could bridge this gap of where we got like all the people who are in the working class who think they're like on the red side and the blue side, and realize we're really in the same boat. Yeah, this is a major problem we got to tackle.
You got to attack the left-right false control dichotomy. That's the thing you always got to attack in these things first, and make the discussion about that, and then feudalism, like because you have feudal capitalism, and then you have pro-industrial anti-imperial capitalism. You got feudal socialism, and then you got the pro-industrial anti-imperial socialism. And you can't make sense of our history if one isn't sensitive to this nuance. As Stalin said, like we can get when he was criticized for working with the United States leading up to World War II, he was like, look, we can work with the industrial capitalists. We can't work with the feudal capitalists. And Roosevelt understood something similar when asked, like, why are you working with the socialists? He's like, look, we can work with the industrial socialists. We can't work with the feudal socialists, referring as well to the deep state Fabians built up around his own State Department who were trying to kill him, working with J.P. Morgan and people who Connie Morgan today says is the great hero with Miles Guo of American history. That was who was trying to do the bankers coup or the business coup and overthrow Roosevelt, right? They were the same people trying to kill Stalin because they both had fifth columnists inside both of their countries trying to kill them both because they were both trying to revive and utilize the power of the sovereign nation state to get shit done against fascism, basically.